What is up, everybody, and welcome to Celtics Talk Weekly Postgame. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo, and today Franco is joining me. It's just us two on the postgame tonight. Rob, Justin, and Ian getting the night off. But the Celtics, as you see on that bottom ticker right there, the Boston Celtics defeat the Toronto Raptors 108-105 in their second in-season tournament game ever. Franco, what your initial thoughts on tonight's big Celtics in-season tournament win?
Very, very, very scrappy game tonight. They were beat for they had a very strong first quarter, and then once that they kind of seemed like they were becoming more of an independent scoring team, hucking up 3-pointers and missing. Jason Tatum having a weaker night than usual, 1 of 11 from the 3-point line. But when they started to spread the ball around and started to pick up once it reached the final 6 minutes of the game, they got back to their game and finished off strong.
Yeah, I thought tonight's game, the Boston Celtics, you look at the early portion of this game, it really seemed like this was going to be a blowout. And I even posted on my page that ever since that Tatum game 2 years ago, in which he dropped 40 in Tampa, we all forget the Toronto Raptors straight up played in Tampa, Florida for an entire season during the COVID stretch there. But when they were in Tampa, Jason Tatum and the Boston Celtics went down there. Jason Tatum dropped 40 on their head. They came out with a double-digit win, and I kind of felt like ever since that moment, the Toronto Raptors were more of a little brother to the Celtics than anything else. And right after I posted that, the Toronto Raptors went, no. Dennis Schroeder went, no. Pascal Siakam went, no. We're not going to take any of that talk tonight. And they actually made this a game to the point in which, I don't know how you felt down the stretch, but did you feel as if the Celtics were actually going to pull this game out in crunch time?
It was a very indecisive game for me. When it got to the third quarter, I started having PTSD attacks of last year, watching that 16-point lead vanish and Toronto getting behind them and getting the crowd into it. Drake was in the crowd, had some good funny commentary I saw on Instagram, but they were really able to answer. Drew Holiday on defense being able to match up. Kristaps picking up when those guys are having an off night, JB and JT, which JB picked up his end, but Kristaps was a key factor in the paint when he was getting those mismatches against Schroeder. And when they started spreading the ball around, it was the second or third pass, and it kind of looked like a couple times that Hauser and Horford both were open, and they were just deciding who was going to take the shot and make it. That's when that team is at its most successful, when everyone's getting a look at the ball.
Yeah, for sure. And tonight you even mentioned it, Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum not exactly on their games, although I will say one of them did come away potentially later. We might talk about one of them in regards to the player of the game, but not yet. I really want to talk about some of the other guys first before we get on to Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, because we know they kind of had, relative to their standards, they had some off nights. But I thought the bench and some of the other guys, we like to call them other guys, but let's face it, these guys are more than other guys. Derek White, Drew Holiday, and even Porzingis, they're way more than just other guys on a basketball team. But the bench tonight, this is really the type of bench performance outside of, Peyton Pritchard. He had a little bit of a shooting slump tonight, 2 of 7, 1 of 5 from 3. Al Horford and Sam Hauser coming off the bench. It felt like Sam Hauser was able to kind of capture that first half and be that extra spark for the Celtics, whereas Al Horford, especially at the beginning of that fourth quarter, was able to insert himself and be, somebody that hit crucial shots for the Celtics down the stretch. He had 2 crucial threes to start the fourth quarter, in which it seemed like the Celtics were really, it could have gone the other way there for a second. It really looked as if the Toronto Raptors had the momentum to potentially take this game. But you look at those 2 Horford threes at the end, and even at the beginning too, Sam Hauser getting into the game, he was 4 of 7, 3 of 6 from 3. Those 2 guys come out with 22 points off the bench combined, along with Pritchard's 5 off the bench. That's 27 points off the bench for the Celtics tonight. And that's an area in which we typically talk about, that's kind of a weaker spot for the Celtics relative to every other team in the league, is that their depth, although their top 5, top 6 is amongst, probably the best, if not the best. It's amongst the best, it's if not the best. We see the other 3 guys off the bench, or the other 2 guys off the bench, and even behind them, Delano Benton, O'Shea Brissett, Cornette, they didn't even play tonight. Those are some weaker links, but tonight against the Toronto Raptors, Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, they don't necessarily show up in the same way that we're used to them showing up. And the bench, they're the ones who step up. They add another star performance really to the resume, 27 points. What do you think about the bench's performance tonight in Toronto?
Yeah, Hauser has become that key shooter for this team that is desperately needed to come off this bench. What I feel about the other players, Hauser, Pritchard, and Cornette have been the solidified 3 men behind our 6 key players, but I feel like as the time goes, they'll start to get more reps in with the other players, feed people in like Delano Banton when Pritchard's having these average nights. But what Pritchard does is more off ball with this team. He's more of a decoy running around the court on offense. What I see him doing is creating a lot of these slides and running to the other opposite side of the court to get that kick out 3 that they need when Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum is driving. So I really feel like they've kind of found their groove, and everyone has found their role within this offense. Jrue Holiday is very very quiet in this offense while putting up the numbers that we expect. It's so nonchalant when he scores and takes it to the paint or gets that pull-up 3 to start the game. I've noticed throughout every game he's always that tone setter right off the bat, either getting the steal or that open 3 to really just keep this team going, and kind of an energizer bunny.
Yeah, I believe that claim about Jrue Holiday is entirely true, and I think too, Jrue Holiday, we see some other guys in the league. Although Jrue Holiday might have his stretches in which we might see a 4 of 16 game or a 3 of 17 game every now and then. In those performances, typically we want to see few and far between of. But Jrue Holiday, I believe, is a guard not afraid to take over a moment when a moment is big, and I think that's something. There's something to be said about that on a team that will see a lot of big moments throughout the year. A lot of teams hunting them. Also, a lot of teams, in the playoffs, when it comes down to crunch time, they're going to be trying to take the ball out of Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown's hands. Well, Jrue Holiday, although he may not be, insanely efficient as a guard offensively, he's somebody that isn't afraid of taking the ball, going and creating a shot. And I remember Game 3 in Milwaukee last year, or 2 years ago, he hit a massive shot to sink the Celtics in Game 3. And we all know the Celtics could have ended up losing that series if it weren't for some incredible plays later on in that series, and performances rather, by Tatum on the road. But, you just look at Jrue Holiday's ability to sometimes take over the offense and just not be afraid to go out and try to get himself a bucket, try to go out and get himself to his spot and get himself a good look. I think that's an underrated part about Jrue Holiday's game, and I think it's a little bit overshadowed because of his inefficiencies on the offensive end of the floor. However, I do want to bring us to the player of the game tonight. Now, I know that this one may be a little bit controversial, but I believe this man deserves a little bit of praise for the efficiency tonight. And I know many people will say Porzingis, but tonight I went with Jaylen Brown for player of the game, simply because of that 9 of 14 shooting line right there. It felt like Jaylen Brown had a big impact in this game, but it didn't necessarily feel like he was doing too much per se in this game. He only had 3 turnovers at the end of the night. Same with Jason Tatum, and you want to see that number be a little bit lower. maybe one or two turnovers. But I thought Jaylen Brown, for the role he played tonight, he was very efficient. I mean, 9 of 14, only took 14 shots, 5 3-pointers, but he was 3 of 5 and notched 23 points, 3 rebounds, 4 assists. So, Franco, what do you think about Jaylen Brown's performance in Toronto tonight?
When the team is playing efficiently, they have no chance. They just are playing very well with Jaylen Brown. If he's getting to the paint, what I loved was when he was celebrating and looking at the Toronto fans with his left hand, looking at it like he was amazed that it was going in when he was driving it. But that's when he's playing his best game, and that's when the Celtics are playing his best game, when he can get those off the ball opportunities, be that final kick out on that 3-pointer, only have to shoot 5 3-pointers during the game, and not be relied on as a shot creator per se, but more of a slasher, which is more of his role. And he really fulfilled that when a lot of fast break dunks tonight off of defense. He was always the first one down the court alongside Tatum, which was a key factor in this team winning tonight. But when we see Jaylen Brown doing this, this is where that $300 million kicks in. And over time, it's just going to grow more and more worth it. Plus, if we start looking at contracts, it's going to be a minuscule contract in the next 2 years.
Yeah, looking at Jaylen Brown's performance tonight, like I kind of already mentioned it when the graphic was up, it's just really the efficiency for me. It's the fact of he didn't turn the ball over. He didn't make the mistakes that, sometimes we might jump on a little bit, especially in crunch time where, if you're turning the ball over and you're taking these shots that, we typically see Jaylen Brown get rushed sometimes in late moment situations where it's like, all right, Jaylen, if you're going to go be the guy and score, he sometimes seems rushed in those situations and he might jack up a contested shot in which, we might look at and go, is it better for him to take that kind of a shot? We know he's the star player, but is it better for him to take that kind of a shot or just run the offense for something to come out of the flow of the offense in the half court rather than, him going isolation on his own early in the shot clock? But I thought tonight, there weren't a lot of those moments. There weren't a lot of those moments of Jaylen Brown, having to take over the moment. And maybe that's something else to be said more about his game. Like, I guess people could sit up here and say that, you know, because I'm saying this, we might not believe so much in Jaylen Brown as the top star player. But on this team, Jason Tatum, at the end of the day, is the guy who we're putting the ball in the hands to, number one option, and Jaylen Brown's our number two. And if he's playing in this manner where he's only taking 14 shots, other guys on the roster, Jason Tatum, he didn't have a great night, but he took 22 shots tonight. Porzingis 13, White 10, and Drew Holiday 14. If Jaylen Brown is in this role right here, only 14 shots, which we know he takes more shots usually, this is perfect efficiency. It really is. I mean, only missed 5 shots on the night. He was 3 of 5 from 3. And you just look, he was really one of 3-4 players on the Celtics roster with a positive plus minus as well tonight. So Jaylen Brown, for as bad as Jason Tatum was in terms of his efficiency, which we can bring up Jason Tatum here on the bottom and talk about him next. For as bad as Jason Tatum was, Jaylen Brown I thought was very, very efficient tonight with his opportunities and his looks. But as for Jason Tatum, as we see on the bottom of the screen here, 1 of 11 from 3, 8 of 22. For me personally, I think this is just one of those nights where the shot just isn't going in. If he makes 5 of 11, which I know is still a hefty amount, that's only 4 more threes out of an extra 10 that he took. That's 4 of 10's 40%, and even 3 of 10. He's shooting 4 of 11. He comes out of this game with 26 instead. I think it was just one of those nights for Jason Tatum. What did you see out of Jason Tatum and his, some may say, lackluster performance tonight?
It's one of those nights where you kind of want to see him, instead of taking those shots, those sidestep shots and those 3-pointers that are contested isolations, to kick it out and have Jrue Holiday or Derek White set up the play for him. When he needs to. I feel like when his game starts from the inside and works its way outwards, that's when he's performing at his best. His capability to play defense was great tonight. He was able to match up with the with Pascal and switch off with Kristaps. But when Jaylen Brown is performing well, the other players are shooting high efficiency. I feel like during that third quarter, there were times that he was kind of forcing his takes, and he's a top 5 player. We want our top 5 player to shoot his shot and be confident, but we also want him to be confident in letting the ball into the other players' hands and letting them work as well.
Yeah, and just looking at, I'm taking a peek here at Jason Tatum's shot chart for a second because, um, quite frankly, it just seemed like some of his attempts, I didn't feel as if he had, his attempts were all that bad tonight. I mean, typically too, a star's attempts. Jason Tatum's a star player in which you look at, and for some reason he can't make the wide open ones, but he can make all the tough ones. Just a defender draped all over him. And tonight, 1 of 11. Looking at his shot chart, I definitely felt some of the opportunities were there for him, and the Celtics, I thought they did a really good job of penetrating the paint. Now, we can talk about their defense on the other end of the floor, them allowing Toronto to penetrate even more than themselves. But I thought the Celtics' ability to penetrate the paint and create outside looks tonight, especially for Jason Tatum, it was sufficient enough, especially, we came out with a win here, but it was sufficient enough to feel comfortable with. And like I said earlier, this was just kind of one of those nights for Jason Tatum where he just misses those open shots, misses beyond the arc, all but one time. One time. I mean, he missed 10 3-pointers tonight, taking 11. I just don't expect to see too many of those performances out of Jason Tatum. But our third star player, we should talk about here a little bit too. Kristaps Porzingis, 14 points, 12 rebounds, 5 assists, 3 blocks. 3 blocks. So game after Al Horford. See, in this, I can definitely understand why Kristaps Porzingis maybe should be the player of the game tonight. But Kristaps Porzingis, despite that, Al Horford, 5 blocks in Philadelphia on Wednesday night. Friday, we moved to Friday, and Kristaps Porzingis puts up 3 blocks. That's 8 blocks in 2 games between Porzingis and Al Horford. And I mean, against a team like the Toronto Raptors, who have a lot of size, they have Siakam, Scotty Barnes, Grady Dick is a lot. Yeah, Jakob Pertl is big. Grady Dick is a lot bigger than people really think. And even going down the list to Jalen McDaniels and Achua. Well, Jalen McDaniels only played 7 minutes tonight, but Achua, 25 minutes. That's a lot of size out there. And Porzingis, to have this kind of performance on the boards tonight, and of course within the game of deterrence, that's pretty big for the Celtics. What did you think about Kristaps Porzingis' performance against Toronto tonight?
The fact that he's able to play the center position as a straight center, not the 4 or 5 that people assumed he was going to be when he came to the Celtics, is so huge for this team this year, with the loss of Robert Williams, Grant Williams, and with Al Horford becoming a bench role. The fact that he's able to use his wingspan to cover other shots when he goes up to the top of the key, he's taking away 3-pointers, which is huge. Saw Cornet contest from him, so he's learning a little bit from him. That's he's just stepping up as a defender, and that was kind of one of the things that was really unspoken about him coming to this team, was his defense. And he was a two-way star, but people questioned how durable he was going to be. He's given us a lot, and having him and Brown were huge tonight. I don't feel like we would have won tonight if we were missing either one of those players. Definitely if one of them stayed back, but I'm feeling really good about him, and I hope that he starts to stretch out the floor more. But as, but yeah, down low, he's doing really well.
Yeah, and looking at this performance tonight, it's great to see that Porzingis can make a definitive impact despite not really having the outside shot going. He was 0 of 3 from beyond the arc tonight. Not exactly, I mean, just not effective at all beyond the perimeter outside of being a big body out on the perimeter that the Toronto Raptors have to focus on. Didn't hit a shot from outside the perimeter yet, still came away with 14 points and did a lot of work down low in a game that was, pretty physical against a sizable team. And, you mentioned Cornet there for a second. Are you a little surprised that we didn't see a little bit more of Cornet tonight? Because, you look at some of the numbers for this game for the Celtics in regards to the paint, and they were squashed in points in the paint. It was 54-40, and I know it's only a 14-point margin, still a 14-point margin, pretty sizable at the end, but it really felt like it was more for a big portion of the game. Are you a little bit surprised the Celtics didn't go towards Cornet for just a couple minutes here and there because of Toronto's ability just to continuously get inside the paint?
I'm really surprised at the fact that they are running 8 men. That seems like a type of rotation off the bench that you can get away with sprinkling in these players for 8 to 10 minute spurts and only giving them one rotation per night if that's what need be. But this just Cornet and coming off the bench, I know he's given us a few reliable nights, but Horford being able to maintain what he has, it's just all about the long run. And if these players are going to be able to maintain playing, 30 minutes for the starters. So yeah, it was 35 across the board for all the starters. So I kind of want to see those numbers cut down once again. We should start a segment of free Lamar Stevens and free O'Shea Brissett, because I really want to see more from those guys, but they're kind of getting held back, and I feel like that's where they're going to step in, is down like game 52 through game 82.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about tonight's game as well is I believe I forgot which podcast exactly, and I kind of want to, I'll just give him a shout out anyway. The Bill Simmons podcast, I believe this was brought up on the Bill Simmons podcast the other day when he was talking with Doc Rivers. Might have been somebody else, but he said, he mentioned potentially teams in these in-season tournament games, are they going to play more like playoff rotations because these games are supposedly more important for the players? Now, the end result, 500K, a lot of these players want to play for all the players that 500K, that'll be a pretty nice tick up to their salary. Now, guys like Tatum and Brown, it's just a couple of,
it's
a
like
couple of cents towards them.
Yeah, it's a 50-50 split with the leagues. Half of them, it won't even matter to them. The other ones, it's going to be their biggest pay cut of the year.
What's so weird about that, too, is the fact, like, most players who are going to be within the rotations, it's like those are the players who are compensated, and the players who aren't necessarily compensated as much are the players who don't necessarily get to impact the result outside of practice and whatever they can say on the bench, which, does make an impact as well. But Bill Simmons mentioned the other day that, our team's going to play playoff rotations sort of in this in-season tournament. Tonight we kind of saw that's what the Celtics did. They kind of played their playoff rotation a little bit. They went Brown, Tatum, Porzingis, White, Holiday. And I would argue that these aren't necessarily playoff minutes, because in the playoffs, you're probably seeing Peyton Pritchard's 7 minutes go to Derek White and Drew Holiday, and he probably plays 10 minutes, if that. And then Hauser and Horford, you might see Horford, he might have an uptick a little bit in minutes, and Hauser might, slide down a little bit. So outside of just those minutes, a couple more minutes on the bench, it seems like the Celtics played their playoff rotation tonight relative to their competition. They didn't bother playing Banton. They didn't bother playing Brissett. We already talked about they didn't bother playing Luke Cornett, who's kind of become a regular within their rotation. And yet tonight they play 8 guys. It kind of, it kind of felt like a playoff game a little bit. These in-season tournament games definitely feel like different games, different courts, different jerseys, and different graphics. Just our show alone. Look at our graphics; they're different everywhere on local TV and national broadcasts. They're different. These games definitely feel, like they have a little bit of a hype surrounding them. And there is a main goal, a purpose at the end. And I believe more of that purpose will be shown once people actually win the tournament, a team actually wins the tournament. And I do wonder if teams will treat their rotations like the playoffs during the in-season tournament. And, maybe tonight, even looking at Toronto's rotation off the bench, Grady Dick, 10 minutes, Jalen McDaniels, 7 minutes, Achua, 24, Boucher, 18, Malachi Flynn, 19. Maybe Malachi Flynn and maybe Grady Dick don't get the call in the playoffs. Even the Toronto Raptors don't play that many guys tonight in terms of the stack of minutes. I don't know. Do you think that teams will play their more and more type of a playoff rotation during this in-season tournament, or do you think they're going to treat it more like the regular season and that this was kind of more of a just, I don't want to say fluke, but situational structure here tonight for the Celtics in terms of their rotation?
I feel like this is what the Celtics wanted and envisioned going into the season, being their rotation and they're starting their 8-man with Cornette and being an off the bench player coming in as that depth piece, that third big man. But I feel like a lot of teams are going to value this a lot more than others. Per se, the Raptors. The Celtics, being at the top of the mountain, have the biggest target on their back. A lot of these teams want to knock off a team like the Celtics for the morale. Plus, in an in-season tournament, this could be, for a lot of teams, kind of their NBA championship if they don't make the playoffs or if they get knocked out or eliminated. So I feel like it brings a new level of intensity to these games, and I feel like these coaches are using it as a kind of a showcase of what they would do in high situation, high intensity basketball games. And I feel like we're going to get a lot better playoff basketball because these players are going to be so tuned to the moment and ready for it that it's going to be second nature to them.
Yeah, I absolutely love that point that you made, that the intensity of these games are different, and the fact of when teams are going to be going into the playoffs later into the season. A lot of these teams, look, we see a lot of young talent out here in the NBA right now. There's a lot of young talent, and even at the top, there's a lot of young talent who's going to be able to make an impact on within a rotation, whether it's maybe as a third or fourth guy. Those teams are probably not going to be probably making it as far. But even some younger players like Jaime Jaquez comes to mind with Miami Heat. We're going to see that guy in the Eastern Conference Finals. Like, he's going to be playing with the Miami Heat in their rotation. I feel like guys like that, this is a great opportunity to gain early in-season experience before the playoffs for what is supposed to be, this is an event in which is supposed to be a playoff like event. It's supposed to be an event for everybody to watch. Like, this is an important thing. The in-season tournament, a champion will eventually be crowned. Like, we look at the finals, a champion will be crowned. What's the purpose of all of this? It's the same purpose. It's to create the hype behind it. And we all know when you're actually in those situations as a player, despite the trophy meaning nothing and you're going to get an extra paycheck, whatever, those moments, they're bigger. They're bigger. Like, egotistically, they are bigger for one to build that up over time. And I feel as if these in-season tournament moments, it just prepares players more and more for that moment, in the moment when the playoffs do come around. And even, like, I don't want to say the playoffs. I'm kind of refraining from saying the playoffs are more important than the in-season tournament, but we kind of know they are. from just a historical standpoint right now, they're more important than the in-season tournament. And for that moment, guys are going to have a great experience playing in this tournament and getting to places in which I think we're going to see teams within this tournament make it farther along in the tournament than say teams that are going to make it farther along in the playoffs, because we're inevitably going to see a team or two lose early in the in-season tournament that maybe later on down the line they turn the corner, or they grab a 3 or 4 seed and they're going far in the playoffs, or vice versa. A team goes far in the in-season tournament, doesn't go far in the playoffs. So we're inevitably going to have that kind of situation come to be where the discrepancy in results we'll see play out. And for those teams who don't gain that playoff experience this year, but might gain it in the in-season tournament, I think the in-season tournament is just an amazing opportunity and experience for those players and those teams still on the rise. Like a team like OKC, they come to mind. They might win this whole in-season tournament at the end of the day,
just
and
because
they might
they
not
want it more.
Right, and because they want it more, they might not even make the playoffs. Or I shouldn't say they might not make the playoffs. They might not make it to the second round of the playoffs. Playing tournament, never know. They might not make the playoffs this year. The West is pretty deep, but a team like that, they could easily win this whole thing. The Minnesota Timberwolves, they could easily win this whole thing. It's a single elimination tournament, and in the playoffs, those are teams that people are high on the Timberwolves right now, but they might not make the second round. Who knows? But jutting back to tonight's game between the Celtics and Raptors, this game was obviously very different from a week ago. The Raptors came into the Garden. The Celtics absolutely blew them out. At the end of the game, I should say this first. At the end of the game, Joe Mazzulla challenged a call, and the Celtics were up by 30. Dennis Schroeder went into the locker room, and of course, during his post-game presser, Dennis Schroeder goes, well, I thought, Joe Mazzulla challenging the play was a little bit disrespectful. A little bit disrespectful when we're down 30. Like, what is there to gain when we're down 30 and when you're up 30 and you're challenging a play? Now, my personal opinion here, I've always loved coaches taking every single opportunity possible to them to do it, like to further their team, right? And that's what Joe Mazzulla said. He said he was empowering his guys. And even, of course, kind of as a coach too, the challenge, Joe Mazzulla is a new coach. The challenge is only a couple years old. When to use that challenge is definitely a challenge in itself. And I like the opportunities that are given to head coaches, even at the end of blowouts. Like we see it a lot in football where, coaches, that's extra reps. That's extra reps for players at the end of games. I personally don't mind Joe Mazzulla challenging a play at the end of the game. Dennis Schroeder did. Now, you guys maybe talked about it a little bit on post game that night, but I have 2 questions here. Number one, do you okay the challenge by Mazzulla? Like, do you accept it? Like, was it okay? And number 2, did you feel as if the Toronto Raptors had any extra fight tonight from that particular incident last Saturday?
They're building, it's called NBA script storyline builders. We'll see them in round 1, and those clips will be used in the pregame shows to hype up the game and make Toronto feel hype for it. But all jokes aside, I love when teams keep the intensity up. When you have someone down, you step on their neck and make sure they don't get up and finish the job. It's very key for Joe Mazzulla to keep that same level of intensity throughout, because to be number 1, you're going to have to keep a very tight ship ran. You're not going to be able to take any nights off. That's what they have to send, and that's a really big message that needs to be sent early, and I felt like it was to the rest of the league, because that made headlines that the Celtics are keeping the foot on the gas when it reaches the fourth quarter and they have a 20-point lead. They're putting in their rotation players to watch them succeed, not just maintain a lead and hopefully keep it there. Because as we've seen and learned dreadfully over the past 2 or 3 years, when it gets down to those garbage time minutes and you let your foot off the gas, that's when those 16-point deficits become 0-point deficits and you are trying to fight back in the final 5 minutes of the game. When it comes down to it, just go into every game and play the full 48 minutes and take any chance or advantage you have to make your team in a better chance to win.
Yeah, no doubt. And looking at tonight's game, the Celtics could have easily lost.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we could have easily lost the rope at the end of this game, and we're in here discussing things entirely differently. And this conversation around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum isn't, their nights were not as boisterous as we're used to, but they got the job done. Instead of that conversation, it easily could have been something else. And just looking at the line score, the Celtics actually lost more quarters than they won this game, and they ended up, shout out to Kobe, 24-24 in the fourth quarter, and were able to pull it out by 3. But also, also want to jump back here for a second on the motivational standpoint of the last topic I talked about. Dennis Schroeder, 9 of 19, 5 of 11, 23 points tonight. Shout out to the former Celtic for taking on this role in Toronto, and he actually played very well tonight. And last game, he had those comments, came out, with a little bit extra fire. 5 of 11 from 3 is nothing to sneeze at. So shout out to Dennis Schroeder, the former Celtic, tonight. But going back to this game and how the Celtics kind of approached this game, that second quarter, the way the Celtics played in that second quarter, I mean, that's really what we want to see all game. 39-17 in that second quarter. But then the third quarter, it felt like the Toronto Raptors, when they came out of the halftime locker room, they went on a 9-0 run. They inserted themselves back into the game, and the Celtics were just never quite able to jump back out to the lead in which they attained in the second quarter. However, it was nice to see that they were able to sustain it. That's definitely something to be said about the Celtics' level of sustainability, like we're talking about this year, where last year and the year before, it was really the first half of the season. The second half of the season was no problem, but especially last year, the Celtics had problems, closing out games every now and then. They had problems keeping their foot on the gas, keeping that 20-point lead, keeping that 15-point lead. We did see them lose the lead tonight, but the difference is when they lost the lead, they never really lost it. I mean, they technically did. They never really lost it to an extent in which we looked at and went, oh, man, we're up 20, now we're down 8. It was more of, we were up 20, now it's tied, now we're down 2, now we're back in the lead by 4.
I think Toronto held the lead for over a minute.
Yeah, and that level of sustainability, I think, for the Celtics, even though they didn't win, more quarters than the Raptors did tonight, they were able to sustain that lead and keep themselves within the game through that adversity, and even on the road, too. On the road, in front of Drake, in front of that Toronto crowd, we always forget. I think nowadays we forget how rowdy that Toronto crowd can be, because the Toronto Raptors are, they're usually that 6, 7, 8 seed range now. They're not at the top of the conference anymore. However, that crowd still goes nuts. And tonight the Celtics faced that adversity on the road. Again, second time in a row, too. Philadelphia on Wednesday. That game was not close. I should say that game was not easy. It was very close. And tonight, again, going on the road in Toronto, facing that adversity, both of these games, I would definitely feel very confident in the Celtics' ability to weather that storm. And for you personally, do you see the Celtics, do you think their level of sustainability within their leads, do you think that they're going to have a little bit of a problem with this year, or do you believe that this is them right now? Do you believe that this is them?
I believe this is it once they get more rotation in. When push comes to shove, players are going to start to need nights off, and the sustainability is going to need to come from more than the 8 players they had playing tonight. And that's where the other additions of Banton, Brissett, and Stevens is going to come in. And I feel like sustainability is really the focal point for this team going into this year, because that was really the main struggle, the main topic. And what I liked about what Joe did when they went on that 9-point run at the start of the second half is he didn't call that timeout immediately. He made them stick it together and slow the ball down and figure out a play to score, and then call a timeout and get a defensive stop. And that's what it's really going to come down to, is when this team reaches those roadblocks that are inevitably going to be in the way, it's going to be how they respond to them.
And do you like Joe Mazzulla doing that?
Oh,
Because for me personally, I gotta say this. I wish he would call more timeouts in specific moments. Now I can completely understand that he's wanting his guys to play through it, but for me, when he wants guys to play through it, I kind of see it as okay, we're trying to develop something in the midst of winning. Like in crucial moments of like, all right, we need to go grab this win. He'll use that moment as kind of a growing moment, which to me it's like the growing happens when you succeed. The
mm-hmm.
growing happens when you either fail or succeed. And the way that the Celtics have played, particular with Brown and Tatum, in the last couple of years, we saw with Ime. Ime was the master at being able to reel them in after the beginning portion of the season when a lot of their possessions would end in a lot of haphazardous attempts early in the shot clock, heavily contested. And I'm not quite certain. I'm not quite certain that Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and this is where it's a double-edged sword. On one hand, I can totally agree with Joe Mazzulla wanting them to play through that and not be those type of players that are jacking up shots early in the shot clock, taking isolation attempts on their own, basically playing hero ball like we saw 2 years ago. I can understand him wanting to play through that, but at the same time, we have a long track record of them just not being able to do that whatsoever, and those timeouts being important. So do you feel like more timeouts should be called, or do you actually like him just playing the guys through that?
It's really situational. When it comes down to a player not hitting those shots and having that consistency, like for example, a Jason Tatum shooting 1 for 11 tonight, and let's say he misses 3 to 4 shots in a row. He needs to be able to convey to these players to look at other options and really just take that deep breath, because I feel like when Jaylen Brown or Jason Tatum aren't hitting that shot, they feel that it is necessary that they need to get it back as quick as they possibly can, which isn't the case. They can easily, they have 5 other players or 3 other players on the court that are more than capable of creating their own options. And it's kind of, I kind of like when they have the case of feed the hot hand, but they also need to know when to take it away from the cold.
Yeah, just from my personal inclination, I mean, to me, I would definitely agree with the, situational argument where sometimes, you know, that timeout seems to be crucial and other times, like I'd say tonight, I actually like him not calling a timeout in the third quarter. Like that's a situation to me where the game is still within range. It's still in hand. We have a lot of time left in the
Still
game
had a
to
lead too.
reconcile a mistake, and that's a moment in which you can grow. But some of the late fourth quarter moments,
Yeah,
those are really
that's
the
not
tough
learning
ones.
time. That's winning time.
Right. I actually love that statement. It's not learning time; it's winning time. That is perfect for that, actually. But update here, real quick, on the in-season tournament East Group C standings, because the Celtics, they do move to 2-0 tonight in the in-season tournament. Have not lost an in-season tournament game in our history. In our history, the Celtics have not lost an in-season tournament game yet. 2-0, of course, but wins over the Brooklyn Nets and Toronto Raptors. But updating the East Group C standings here. Unfortunately, we don't have a graphic for it, so I'm just going to say it out loud. The Boston Celtics lead the group 2-0 right now. They're a half game above the Brooklyn Nets and might as well be a full game above, because one of those, well, the only Nets loss and one of the Celtics wins came against the Nets. And the Nets, they're 2-1 in second place right now, a half game behind the Celtics. 3-4-5. Rough, little rough. 3-4-5. Chicago Bulls, Toronto Raptors, Orlando Magic. They're on the other end of history here. They have not won an in-season tournament game in their franchise's history at all. They're all 0-1, a game and a half back of the Celtics. The Celtics have yet to play the Bulls and the Magic in their in-season tournament group. Came out with huge wins over in division opponents
Mm-hmm.
in the Brooklyn Nets and Toronto Raptors. But the Celtics will take on the Bulls and the Magic in due time, I believe. I don't actually know
I think
when.
Magic are next.
Yeah, next week. I don't have the schedule in front of me right now, but the Bulls and Magic. Do you think the Celtics right now, looking at this East Group C, do you think they may run the table? Think they may end this group on top 4-0? Your
I
thoughts?
mean, that was really the expectation going into this group. This is a bunch of teams that are going to be kind of group the it's kind of men and boys with this division that the Celtics were given, as we can just take it advantage of. But these are teams that I would have expected to be more competitive in this in-season tournament, knowing that their playoff futures aren't too guaranteed. But I feel like running the table through the Eastern Conference should not be an issue in this in-season tournament. It's just going to be who is going to be that hot team. All it takes is one night just to knock us off. So that's the really interesting part about this whole in-season tournament, is all it takes is one off night for it all to go downhill.
Yeah, and tonight the Orlando Magic actually defeated the Chicago Bulls within our group 103-97 on the road in Chicago. And I'm actually very interested to see us play the Magic, because the Orlando Magic have been a team that have not been good in recent years. Basically, the last decade, they had a couple of stints in the playoffs as a 7 seed, but nothing really to present within their whole history. Nikola Vucevic, Terrence Ross, whatever. But those guys, those guys in the past, those Magic guys in the past, now they have new guys: Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Anthony Black, Markelle Fultz, Cole Anthony, all of those guys, Jonathan Isaac. Those guys within the Magic rotation, they're new. They're a new team. They're one of the better defensive teams in the NBA. This is not your grandma's Orlando Magic at all. It's not the last decade's Orlando Magic, even though we did have some trouble with that Orlando Magic team. But this particular Orlando Magic team, I'm excited for us to actually play and see, because of the competition that the Magic always bring the Celtics. It's just something. It's like them, and I don't know. The Hornets used to bring us a little bit more trouble before they're a total mess right now. However, we see these teams, they typically play the Celtics well, not being too great of a team, but now the Magic are, I believe, going to be potentially an East playoff team this year, and maybe even a team we face in round one, maybe a round one playoff team in the Magic, and we'll be going against them in this in-season tournament. Um, in regards to our future games against the Bulls in the Magic, do you see us potentially? Now I know I asked if we were going to potentially run the table, but say how we played against the Raptors tonight. Do you potentially see us playing a little bit of the same way against these next two teams, or do you see us kind of mixing and matching a little bit? Now I know it's kind of hard to say whether or not we're actually going to play Lamar Stevens, O'Shea Brissett, Luke Cornett at certain times. But, you look at a team against like Chicago, they have Andre Drummond coming off the bench, Nikola Vucevic. Those are real big bodies. Goga Batadze, Jonathan Isaac, the Wagner brothers with Orlando. Do you see us playing a little bit differently against these two in-season tournament opponents coming up here on the schedule?
Definitely want to see a little bit more Brissett and Cornette against those teams, which we did see when we saw Minnesota and I think the Knicks, when teams are really running the 4-5 using a true power forward, not just using that as another wing player. That's where the Celtics really match up a little more awkwardly, because Tatum is more inclined to be guarding a wing, but he's been able to hold his own against these power forwards like Julius Randle. And I think rotation should stay generally the same, if not just a little diluted minutes and maybe sprinkling in those players. And who knows, maybe if we were able to sustain that 16-point lead through that third quarter, we might have seen Cornette, Brissett, and Stevens tonight. But it's all about just being able to maintain a lead and hold it there, and then we'll start to see more of those players.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting moving forward, just situationally, night to night, what we see and what we don't see, because I think we've sat in here many, many times and we've discussed, Celtics could have played these players here and played these players here and blah blah blah. But you look at our record, 10-2, 10-2, only losses to the Sixers when we didn't have Horford, I believe, and the Minnesota Timberwolves when we didn't have Derek White. So the rotation on a night-to-night basis, whatever we say about it, still looking quite well. We can get wins on our schedule. But speaking of our schedule, our next game will be against the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, this one, a little bit of a disclaimer on this one. This one was supposed to be an exciting game for everybody. Not a game in Boston. I'll be there in Memphis on Sunday. However, this was supposed to be Marcus Smart versus the Celtics. It was supposed to be Marcus Smart versus the Celtics for the first time ever. And unfortunately, Marcus Smart out with an ankle injury. I actually have the clip here of Smart's ankle injury. We'll pull it up for everybody to see. But Marcus Smart, unfortunately, not going to be in the lineup on Sunday when the Celtics take on the Memphis Grizzlies.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there you go. You saw Marcus Smart's injury against the Lakers this past week. He actually had a big game, two big games out in LA for the Grizzlies, and he's really one of their only bright spots right now. Him, Desmond Bane, and Jaren Jackson's been all right. I think he's way better on a better team with better players around him, and actually when he tries. But those are really the only bright spots for the Grizzlies, who the Celtics will be taking on Sunday, 2-9. No Marcus Smart, but I think the Celtics on Sunday, this will be, it's kind of a sneaky game here. Sneaky game on Sunday. The Grizzlies, they've had 5 days of rest. 5. That's pretty significant amount of time. No Marcus Smart. They're 2-9. The Celtics are coming off of two significant road games, that is, one against their rivals in the Sixers, the other an in-season tournament game against the Raptors in Toronto in front of Drake, in front of the whole house, and the sixth there. Now they're going down to Memphis. The crowd not expected to be as electric down in Memphis. 2-9 team. They're missing their starting point guard. Missing actually two of their starting point guards, that is, Marcus Smart and Ja Morant. This is kind of a sneaky game for the Celtics. What do you think the Celtics need to do on Sunday in order to pull out a third road victory in a row?
This is just one of those games that last year would be one of those ones that we would kind of brush under the table and then be surprised when we saw the loss. But the Memphis Grizzlies are pretty injury battered. I don't know. Is Steven Adams still dealing with anything? He's still out.
I believe right now the Grizzlies, they're straight up running with Xavier Tillman and Bismack Biyombo. So yeah, Steven Adams, I believe, is out for the season with a PCL injury. Which, if a lot of people don't know, your PCL, that's like if you feel the back of your knee, that's basically like the ligament within the back of your knee. So like that's not a comfortable injury at all. And he'll be out for a pretty significant period of time. And hopefully he can actually come back and make the same impact he made before. But yeah, the Grizzlies will not have that physical body, but they still have Bismack Biyombo out there. I know a lot of people might, sneeze at that name, but
is
the
Triple
Celtics
J
aren't
still
careful.
out there?
If the Celtics aren't careful against Bismack Biyombo, he can still give a team some minutes for sure.
Oh yeah. Is Jaren Jackson gonna be? I haven't. Are the Memphis Grizzlies just missing their entire starting lineup right now, except for Desmond Bane? Or
well, let's go to the injury report real quick for this particular. Well, I guess the NBA wouldn't have the injury report out right now for that particular game, although they would have the injury report out for the Grizzlies. Let me go take a peek at that. But Marcus Smart, it was announced today by Shams Charania, I believe, that he will be out 3 to 5 weeks with his ankle injury. So, and we've seen Marcus Smart too with the Celtics. This ankle injury, a lot of people just twist their ankle and we think, okay, that's, a couple days, a week, whatever. He's sustained a couple of ankle injuries here already, to the point in which, you kind of look at his latest ankle injury. He came down quite hard on Austin Reeves' foot there. There could be a lot more pain going on within Marcus Smart's foot, a lot more, there's just a lot more, I shouldn't say damage, lingering. But that's potential with Marcus Smart's current injury, and he'll be out 3 to 5 weeks. But yeah, the injury report here coming up in front of me, the Grizzlies actually, I should say this, they don't have a bunch of rest before our game. Now they have a bunch of rest this week. They're off this entire week because they played Sunday. Then I believe, or they played Sunday or Monday. They don't play again until Saturday. So tomorrow they play against the Spurs, Wembanyama. No Tillman in that game. No Derrick Rose, no Luke Kennard, no Marcus Smart, no Steven Adams, no Brandon Clark. So, I mean, we're gonna see a lot of Desmond Bane. We're gonna see, some Zaire Williams for sure, and man, we are gonna see a lot of Bismack Biyombo. You're talking about Xavier Tillman, Steven Adams. They don't have any other bigs. They don't have any other bigs other than Biyombo, and they might have another guy at the bench, but you've seen a lot of David Roddy, LaRavia. This Memphis Grizzlies team, they're 2-9. They don't look good. They really don't have a star penetrator whatsoever, somebody who can go out and get them a bucket, somebody who can consistently attack the paint, put defenses on their toes, collapse defenses, make good decisions. The closest thing to that is Marcus Smart right now, and we just know that Marcus Smart isn't really a player that's putting fear into defenses. Like, he's a complimentary player. But the Grizzlies, I will say for them, they do have a lot of young length. They do have a lot of young, tough length. Now, I don't agree with some of their moves in the last couple of years. They've moved off of some guys they could have easily just paid at a pretty low price to keep their rotation, and they didn't. They opted for the young guys, and some of these young guys, they just haven't stepped up to the plate yet, and some of their shooting percentages have been awful, and just their overall makeup and the intangibles within their game to be consistent role players rather, that is, night to night. A lot of these young guys haven't reached that plateau yet. However, I do believe this Memphis Grizzlies team is a little bit dangerous from the standpoint of they do have that young length, that young size, and also young guys. It's like, what are you playing for? You're playing for a contract. You're always playing hard. Some of the guys, on the Celtics, Jaylen Brown, I want to call Jaylen Brown, not saying he's going to do this, but, he makes $304 million, whereas Jake LaRavia makes like $2 million each year. There's going to be some extra motivation for the guy who makes $2 million. So the Celtics on Sunday, they'll be taking on the Memphis Grizzlies in Memphis. No Marcus Smart, no Tillman, no Rose, no Kennard, no Steven Adams, no Brandon Clark, no John Morant. But this will be an important game for the Celtics to go in and actually play on the road because, like I said, the young guys, they're not gonna roll over. But that is pretty much all we have here today on the Celtics for the Celtics post game against the Raptors. The Celtics Talk weekly post game against the Raptors. Now, before we log off here, any last thoughts on tonight's game, the in-season tournament, or the Celtics schedule moving forward?
The in-season tournament has been more successful than I thought. Only thing I really want them to change is kind of give the cities more free reign of what the jerseys and concepts of the courts are going to look like. I kind of don't like how they're all kind of in the same layout, and some of them don't really match up to the city, but it also is just going to come with time as they figure out this thing. This is kind of their trial run, but Marcus Smart being out for the Grizzlies, that's just going to add a little bit more juice to that game in February when he returns home in Boston, because that'll be his original return to the court against the Celtics. And this is one of those games that we would have seen a loss in last year, but hopefully the team sticks together, holds strong, and maybe we see more of those rotation players that we haven't seen in the past couple games.
Yeah, I believe tonight's win was substantial for the Celtics, even though it didn't really feel like that. It didn't really feel like that. It's not like it was a crazy big win for the Celtics, but I do think in the long run, it is a pretty substantial win for the fact of they lose tonight's game. You do have a rebound game in Memphis, but now this kind of opens up the floodgates for them to really go on a run. They have Memphis and Charlotte up next, and they could really go on a run here, pull off a couple straight, and their record is already 10-2. So we could be looking at something where, we're 20 games in, we've only lost, 3 or 4 games potentially. And even this next stretch, if we keep performing, we might not lose another game. Who knows? We might Aaron Rodgers run the table now the whole season. Probably not. But I'm debating on whether or not you talked about the in-season tournament courts and jerseys. And I know I was going to end the show here, but I'm kind of debating on whether or not to pull up some of these in-season courts. I think the two most I'm just going to pull up the 2 most egregious courts. Now, I don't even really think like one of these designs. It's not as if the design of the court is actually bad. It's more of the fact that why are these teams, like, these 2 courts do not match up with the teams whatsoever. And I call these the who's playing courts. This is the who's playing courts. Congratulations, Washington Wizards and San Antonio Spurs. I mean, who's playing? Who's playing? You literally cannot tell who's playing. The Wizards are not those colors. The Spurs are not those colors. And I almost believe that this San Antonio court is a precursor to what the NBA wants the Seattle Supersonics court to look like when they inevitably bring back that franchise this decade. But those are just 2 courts in which are just completely egregious in my mind. But to see more of those courts too, I have a show coming out, the Seamus Zarlingo show. I'll be talking about more of those courts on there. But today, that is all we have for you guys here on the Celtics Talk Weekly post-game show. That's my guy, Franco, over there. I'm Seamus Zarlingo, Celtics every day. If you guys don't know me on social media, I think this went well, Franco. How do you think it went? I think it went very well after a little bit of a messy start. We came on here a little bit late, but I think it went well in the long run. But at the end of the day, thank you guys for listening. Thank you for sticking with us. And of course, we will be on here again when we take on the Memphis Grizzlies on Saturday. And you're not going to believe what just happened. We're still live right now. I'm about to end this live show. I'm boasting about how well it's going. And my computer, in which is running the live, has completely died. Completely died. So guess what, folks? We're going to talk about the Celtics for like 5 minutes. For like 5 more minutes, we're going to talk about the Celtics. This is nuts. Okay. Franco, the Celtics tonight, they played the Raptors. This was a perfect ending to the show until my laptop completely died on me over here. But the Celtics beat the Raptors. They're going to face the Grizzlies on Sunday. And we talked for like an hour about this whole thing. Actually, I'm just going to precursor what happened to this entire show since we have the extra time here. We always knew this was going to happen. This is the first show that I've ever hosted, okay? Like the first show ever. Now, I've been in other shows, say with Ian before, where Ian's had to host, do things before, but usually Rob and Justin, like if anybody ever watches the show, Rob and Justin are usually the head honchos of this show. They're always running the show, and they deserve a ton of credit for the fact of the graphics that come up on screen every single game, every single time a graphic comes here, comes to the bottom right here, comes up right here, every single time. That's Rob or Justin. And it's right before the game, or sorry, right before the post game, coming onto here, putting it up on screen. The amount of work that they do behind the scenes is truly insane. And we just usually come on here and just be faces. Like we're literally just faces at the end of the day. But tonight you saw like a lot more responsibility. Things we were on here an hour late. Like Franco knows way more of the story behind the scenes. Like I had none of the graphics ready, none of this. And we're even seeing right now, we're still live an hour and 10 minutes. And I know my guy over here is like, oh my Lord, just get us off. My laptop dies. My laptop dies over here. And now we can't really end the live unless I get back in here. But Franco, tonight, this whole show here, I think it went well for like the entirety of the bulk of the show, all the way up until I said it went well, and then things went a little awry here. No. The fact that this thing just died on me, just died.
Yeah, honestly, great job with the first time running the show, and it's also our first time doing only 2 people on a show, and we were able to keep the content running, so I think we did a solid job tonight, and the Celtics gave us a good amount of content to talk about tonight with the Seamus Zarlingo show coming out tonight too. That was a great precursor to that. So
yeah, and in that show I'll be talking a lot about more. I should kind of advertise the show now. Now we're at the end of this show. I do have a show coming out, and I already recorded one segment of it. Although I kind of recorded in the sense of like getting reps in, so like practicing per se. But do have a new show coming out called the Seamus Zarlingo Show, and it'll be live on this network to start out with. To begin with, it'll be on Celtics Talk Weekly. However, we want to obviously grow the show further than just the Celtics space. Like that show, the show that I'm going to be doing, that's going to be separate from this, and I hope to have a bunch of guests on in time. It'll be all about the NBA to start out, and then I hope to transition more into sports talk and other topics as well, but it's going to start primarily with the NBA. And that graphic that you guys saw up here earlier, that is that court graphic. That is from the show in which I'm not sure if the recording will come out yet, although I hope to have a recording out soon in which I go through all of the in-season tournament courts and I kind of break them down into categories and I basically, just kind of pick them apart because we kind of talked about them in here. You really can, I don't know, the NBA, they do this with a lot of, they tend to do this with a lot of just jerseys, branding, courts. They use the same colors. They use the same everything. And oh my goodness, it's, as you can see, this is not Rob, it's me, because I've gotten back into the stream weekend finally in this show.
Yep.
Oh my goodness.
Just to add the final thought, I just got a quote coming to my phone from Jaylen Brown saying that he thought the floors tonight were unacceptably slippery.
Okay, now that's actually crazy enough. Well, let's not end the show because that was actually a topic of discussion on the broadcast. They were saying, a lot of guys are slipping out here, slipping. And I almost don't attribute that to the court. You know what I attribute that to? Hockey rinks under the court. Toronto Maple Leafs play. They're in season right now. They have ice under the court. They're changing the courts around quite frequently right now because of the in-season tournament. Usually, you might have the typical court, might leave it on there for a couple of days, take it off for hockey, put it back on. Now you're putting a whole new court onto the surface. That could definitely bring some, condensation problems depending on the makeup of the court, the material of the court. That could definitely bring some problems to the NBA and switching courts. However, it's, I don't know. They play over hockey rinks all the time, so you would think that maybe potentially they'd be able to solve this problem. But that is an interesting comment from Jaylen Brown tonight, for sure. Yeah. But anyway, that was the last comment we're going to hear from anyone tonight because this show is now a wrap. Again, thank you all for listening. Glad I got to plug my other show there at the end. That'll be coming out soon, hopefully sometime next week or at the end of this week. We already kind of have a segment recorded, but more segments on the way. But thank you guys for listening here, staying with us, sticking with us this entire journey. I'm your host, Seamus Zarlingo, aka Celtics Every Day. Right next to me over here, I did the Rob thing, pointed over here. Franco will be on post game again Sunday. Come join us. But tonight, thank you all for joining, and go Celtics.